Investing is for rich people, sweetheart. You should focus on finding a real job and maybe a husband while you're at it. My father's words still ring in my ears, slicing through any trace of confidence I have. I remember standing in the cramped kitchen of my first duplex, the faucet dripping behind me, my heart pounding so loud I was afraid he could hear it. He always had a way of reducing my aspirations to childish dreams. Despite the boldness in my eyes, I felt 10 years old again, waiting for approval that never came. His voice was so certain, so dismissive, that I almost believed him for a moment. But I'd already made my choice. I was going to learn how to invest in real estate, no matter what. Even though my father claimed it was only for people with deep pockets, I was determined to find a way. I'd scrimped and saved from my waitressing job to afford the down payment on this tiny, run-down duplex. I told myself I wouldn't back down just because he scoffed at my plans. Deep down, I ached for his support. But if I couldn't have that, I'd have to become my own champion. I grew up in a family that believed in doing things the normal way. My mother was a nurse, my father worked in construction, and everyone in the house insisted on the same formula for success. Go to school, get a stable job, marry someone nice, then pray you'd retire before your knees gave out. From an early age, I felt that I was out of place. While my siblings studied business or medicine, I devoured books about property development and side hustles. During holidays, I'd show up in my thrifted jeans and off-brand sneakers, excited to share what I'd learned about house hacking or flipping. Instead of applause, I got pitying smiles, eye rolls, or outright laughter. "You think you're some mogul?" my father would joke, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Maybe try finishing college first." The derision extended to my extended family, uncles, aunts, cousins, who treated my endeavors as unrealistic fantasies. They spoke condescendingly, as though my ambition was a phase I'd outgrow. Whenever I entered the room, conversation would stall, then shift into a hush about practical matters. Apparently, my dreams weren't deemed serious enough to join their adult conversation. Indeed, in truth, my reality was far less glamorous than anyone assumed. I didn't live in a fancy condo or drive a sleek car. Instead, I lived in one unit of that old duplex with peeling paint and a rusty chain-link fence. The living room was cramped, the kitchen sink prone to leaks, and the bathroom tiles had seen better days. But I owned it. The mortgage was in my name, and the other unit's rent helped cover my payments. I had also scraped together enough money to buy 2 more properties, both equally run down, using creative financing methods I learned from real estate forums. Every spare dollar went into repairs or mortgage payments. My jeans were faded because I couldn't afford new ones. My nails were never manicured because I refused to spend money on things that didn't multiply my returns. If my family came to visit, they'd cringe at the outdated appliances, but what they didn't see was the equity I was building, the rental income I was collecting, and the long-term vision I was nurturing. I might have looked broke, but the seeds of something powerful had already been planted. Indeed. It was a chilly Thanksgiving when the biggest blow to my pride happened. Like every year, the entire clan gathered at my parents' house, the table sagging under the weight of turkey, stuffing, and pies. My father loved to preside over the meal, cracking jokes and giving unsolicited advice to everyone. This time, the topic of real estate came up as we passed around gravy. My cousin, Ethan, mentioned he'd seen a flyer about multi-family investing, and my father barked a laugh so hearty it made the crystal glasses rattle. "Huh. Do you really think that's a job? Owning one duplex doesn't make you a businesswoman," he crowed, pointing his fork in my direction. Laughter spread around the table like wildfire. My cheeks burned. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting for me to defend myself. But the humiliation was overwhelming, and I froze, my words catching in my throat. The conversation continued with quips like, "At least she doesn't have to pay rent," and "Maybe she'll flip a turkey next." The mocking didn't end until dessert, and by then my appetite had vanished, replaced by a cold knot in my stomach. Indeed. After dinner, I slipped out the back door to the quiet of my childhood backyard. The old swing set still stood there, rusted and creaking in the wind. I sank onto the seat, tears welling up despite my efforts to hold them back. The echo of their laughter rang in my ears, each scoff a nail in the coffin of my confidence. I couldn't understand why my ambition had to be something to ridicule. Did they not see how hard I was working? Did they not care that I was trying to break free from the financial constraints we all grew up with? As the cool autumn air bit at my cheeks, I forced myself to remember all the late nights I spent reading about real estate contracts, all the weekends I spent painting walls instead of partying. I thought about the small but steady cash flow each property brought in, the equity building up in my name. Slowly, I brushed the tears away, inhaling the crisp air. Let them laugh, I told myself. I had a future mapped out, and one day, I'd prove to myself, and maybe to them, that I wasn't the joke they thought I was. Indeed, in the weeks following that Thanksgiving, I pulled back from my father and the rest of the family. Their phone calls went unanswered, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. I couldn't bear to hear another dismissive remark or endure another snide comment. I focused on my work at the restaurant, picking up extra shifts to funnel more money into my real estate projects. My father left a few voicemails, each laced with frustration. "You can't ignore us forever," he'd say in that gruff tone of his. I didn't respond. I buried myself in property management tasks, even tackling minor repairs myself to save on costs. I joined an online community of investors who cheered me on, gave me tips, and helped me stay motivated. It was a strange sense of family, having people I'd never met in person supporting my goals more than my own blood relatives. Over time, the calls and texts slowed, then stopped altogether. Silence filled the gap where family chatter used to be. I missed them in a complicated, painful way, but I also felt more at peace, no longer forced to justify every step of my financial journey. Indeed, during that silent stretch, my portfolio quietly blossomed. I saved enough from my job and rental income to buy another duplex in a rundown neighborhood, then partnered with a local investor to rehab a small apartment building. Each new acquisition felt like a milestone, a testament to my determination. I studied late into the night, reading about tax strategies, property laws, and creative financing. My ambitions grew beyond just owning a few rentals. I wanted to become an accredited investor, to join the ranks of those who could invest in large-scale deals. It felt like climbing a mountain in the dark, with no one cheering, no fatherly voice saying, "I'm proud of you." But I kept climbing. When I finally qualified as an accredited investor, I celebrated alone in my modest living room with a single glass of cheap champagne. I toasted to the invisible audience of doubters who said I'd never amount to anything, and I toasted to myself for every hour of hustle I'd put in. Although my family was absent from these milestones, I found an unshakable sense of purpose in knowing I was building an empire one property at a time. Indeed, things took an unexpected turn when a friend of mine, who ran a small podcast about financial independence, asked if I would share my story. She wanted her listeners to learn from someone who started with almost nothing. I was hesitant at first, not wanting to invite more scrutiny from people who might mock me. But eventually, I agreed, under the condition that she keep my identity somewhat vague. We recorded the episode in her makeshift home studio, a tiny spare bedroom lined with foam panels. I spoke candidly about my struggles, my family's disbelief, and how I'd managed to piece together a growing real estate portfolio. I felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration as I recounted the humiliations, the loneliness, and the tiny victories that lined my path. I didn't expect much from it. I figured maybe a few hundred people would listen at most. But to our surprise, the episode gained traction. Listeners shared it on social media, praising the mysterious real estate queen who'd built multiple properties without any family support. My friend called me, breathless and excited, saying the podcast was going semi-viral within the personal finance niche. Indeed, the aftermath was surreal. One day, I got a text from a distant cousin who never showed much interest in my endeavors, asking if he'd heard my voice on some podcast. Then I learned that a local real estate group I'd once tried to network with was discussing my story as a case study. People were inspired that an ordinary woman, with no silver spoon or trust fund, had managed to accumulate millions in property value. What I didn't anticipate was that someone in my hometown would piece together the clues and realize that mysterious investor was me. Rumors spread, eventually reaching my father's ears. He must have been blindsided because the last time we spoke, he acted like my tiny portfolio was a joke. Now, other people were talking about it as if it were something monumental, something worth respecting. Suddenly, I wasn't just the family misfit with hand-me-down clothes and a crumbling duplex. I was the one who'd quietly built a $20 million portfolio, if the rumors were to be believed. I'd never intended for my father to find out this way, but maybe it was poetic justice. He would hear about my success from someone other than me. I hadn't spoken to my father for over a year when his text popped up. "We need to talk. I heard some news about you." My stomach nodded. I'd spent so long trying to prove myself to him, and now he was reaching out. I debated ignoring him, the same way I had done before. But curiosity gnawed at me. Would he apologize, or was this going to be another lecture about how I was doing something impractical? Against my better judgment, I texted back, "Sure, call me." My phone buzzed almost immediately. His voice was surprisingly gentle, but I could sense the strain beneath it. "Hey kiddo," he said. "How've you been?" I almost laughed at the sudden show of interest. The conversation started with small talk. He asked about my health, my job. Then he slipped in the question, "So, is it true you've got some big-time real estate deals going on?" The shift in his tone made me swallow hard. Something about the way he said it felt transactional, like he'd discovered a gold mine. I braced myself, unsure if I was ready for whatever he wanted to say next. Indeed, we arranged to meet for coffee at a small cafe near my apartment. I arrived early, nerves twisting my stomach into knots. When my father walked in, I was struck by how much he'd aged. The lines around his eyes had deepened, and his once broad shoulders seemed slightly hunched. He smiled in a way I recognized from childhood, a grin that never quite reached his eyes. We settled into a corner booth, each of us with a steaming mug in hand. The awkward silence stretched a moment before he cleared his throat. "I'm proud of you," he began, looking everywhere but my eyes. "I've been hearing about your successes from people around town. You've done good." My heart pounded. Part of me wanted to bask in those words I'd always longed to hear. Another part sensed an undertow of manipulation. We chatted about minor things, weather, health, before he leaned in. "You know," he said quietly, "everything you do, you learn from me in some way. All that grit, that's my blood in you." He paused, letting that sink in. "I just wonder if there's any way we can work together, or, well, if you can help me out." Indeed, that single coffee meeting led him to lay out his real plan. "You're successful now," he said, stirring his latte as though it held the meaning of life. "I could really use some of that success myself." His voice took on a pleading tone, and then he tried to dress it up with fatherly concern. "You know, I'm getting older. The construction job isn't as easy on my body. Don't you think it's time we helped each other? You're my daughter, after all." His eyes danced around the cafe, as if checking to see who might overhear. I felt a rush of emotion, anger, sadness, betrayal. He wasn't here to genuinely reconnect. He was angling for a piece of what I had built. The statement hovered between us. "You should help your father." The words stung, reminding me of all the times he dismissed my dreams. I clenched my fists under the table, trying not to explode. I'd fantasized about this moment, about him finally acknowledging my worth. But not like this. This was a transaction, not a reunion. He wanted a cut of my portfolio because, in his mind, that's what family did. But I couldn't forget how little family had meant when I was struggling. For days after that coffee meeting, I wrestled with my emotions. A part of me yearned for the acceptance I had chased my entire life. If giving him a slice of my success meant finally hearing him say, "I'm proud of you," without ulterior motives, would it be worth it? But another part of me felt deeply conflicted. Hadn't I built this portfolio through my own sweat and tears, often in direct opposition to his belittling? Did it make sense to hand over my hard-earned gains just because he now recognized their value? Late at night, I would pace the worn floorboards of my living room, replaying the conversation in my head. I recalled every instance of his mocking, every moment of humiliation. But then I'd remember I also once craved a word of encouragement or a gentle pat on the back. Torn between my need for familial love and my sense of self-respect, I turned to the few mentors I had in the real estate world. One friend told me, "You can't buy approval. especially not from someone who ridiculed your journey. Another advised me to tread carefully, as mixing family and money could shatter whatever fragile trust remained. Ultimately, my growth had attracted more than just my father's attention. I'd been invited to speak at a small investor event where local landlords, flippers, and property managers would gather. It was the first time I'd ever been asked to present in public. The organizer insisted it would be a great opportunity to network with people who could collaborate on future deals. Nervous, but excited, I decided to go all in. I wanted to show them the real me, not the timid daughter who once cowered at a Thanksgiving table. With the momentum from the podcast, my name was out there, and people wanted to put a face to the story. I prepared a slide deck focusing on how I'd started with almost nothing, made countless mistakes, and slowly built up a multi-million-dollar portfolio. On the day of the event, I stepped into a large hall filled with curious faces. Heart pounding, I took the mic and shared my journey with authenticity. To my surprise, they listened intently. The applause at the end was overwhelming, and a line of people formed to shake my hand, ask questions, or propose partnerships. A fire ignited in me that day. I realized I was no longer invisible. I decided to host a follow-up gathering at my latest property, a vineyard estate that I'd purchased in cash with funds from a big syndication deal. It was an unconventional move, but I wanted to show potential partners what I was capable of. Truth be told, I also wanted my family to see it. Maybe they'd finally understand the scale of what I'd achieved. The property was breathtaking. Rows of grapevines stretching as far as the eye could see, a rustic barn transformed into an elegant event space, and a renovated farmhouse with high ceilings and French doors that opened to a lush courtyard. I sent out invitations to a select group of investors, colleagues, and yes, my parents and siblings. Many of them responded with curiosity tinged with disbelief. Was this really my estate? Was I really hosting an event there? On the day of the gathering, I arrived early to set up tables, arrange a small bar, and make sure everything was perfect. I could feel my pulse quicken every time a car pulled up, each new arrival stepping out with wide eyes, taking in the view of the sprawling property that, at least on paper, belonged to me. My family arrived late, all bunched together, like they were stepping into a foreign land. My father scanned the surroundings, his eyes darting from the manicured gardens to the shimmering pond. He seemed genuinely stunned, as though he couldn't fathom how his supposedly naive daughter could acquire such a place. My mother trailed behind, her expression a mixture of awe and discomfort. My siblings murmured amongst themselves, pointing at the vines and the refurbished barn. I approached them cautiously, nerves buzzing in my veins. "Welcome," I said, attempting a warm smile. My father opened his mouth, closed it, and then opened it again. "This is yours?" he finally managed, voice gravely. I nodded, silently praying he wouldn't dismiss it as some fluke. He swallowed hard, struggling to form words. The rest of the family looked on, uncertain whether to congratulate me or wait for his cue. Breaking the tension, I offered to show them around. They trailed behind me, eyes wide as I explained the estate's layout, the revenue streams from wine tours and private events, and how I planned to expand. My father remained silent, his face a storm of emotions, until he finally muttered, "You did all this yourself?" After the tour, he pulled me aside, away from the small crowd of investors sipping wine under the patio heaters. He looked at me with a careful expression, as if gauging how much of the old father-daughter dynamic remained. "Look," he began, voice low, "I know things haven't been great between us, but I just want to be a part of your life again. I've been thinking, maybe we can start over." The words sounded almost tender, but I felt a shiver of doubt. His sudden desire for closeness felt hollow. I recalled how his tone had changed after hearing about my net worth. I thought back to the coffee shop conversation when he'd basically asked me for money. Now, he wanted to start over here, in the midst of my biggest success? My heart clenched. Part of me wanted to believe he was sincere, that he regretted pushing me away. But another part couldn't ignore the pattern. All this affection only surfaced once my achievements were undeniable. "I appreciate that," I finally replied, my voice trembling slightly. Yet a voice inside me whispered, "He's not after reconciliation. He's after your empire." Indeed. I decided to test his intentions by offering him a constructive way back into my life. Instead of writing him a check or making a vague promise of financial support, I proposed an actual job. "I have a few properties that need better management," I told him. "If you're interested, you could oversee some of the renovations or coordinate the construction teams." It was a position that would allow him to earn money while also contributing skills he'd honed over decades. I held my breath, waiting for his reaction. If he truly wanted to be part of my life, working with me could be a tangible first step. Yet I sensed a subtle recoil in him. He blinked, as if I just insulted him. "Work for you?" he repeated, his voice laced with disbelief. "I'm your father. I raised you. I'm not some hired hand." A flush crept up his neck, and I realized he was offended by the notion. In that moment, the truth crystallized. He wanted a cut without strings attached. He wanted pride without humility, and he was not willing to place himself under my leadership, even if it meant bridging our fractured bond. Indeed, his rejection was swift and stung more than I expected. "I'm not going to be your employee," he said, crossing his arms. "I put food on your table when you were a kid. I'm the reason you even had a roof over your head." I felt my chest tighten as he rehashed old responsibilities that any parent would normally fulfill. His voice grew heated, echoing the self-righteous stance he'd always taken. "All those years I taught you discipline. Don't pretend you did this all alone." The defiance in his eyes reminded me of every belittling conversation we'd ever had. In that instance, I understood that his ego would never allow him to see me as an equal, let alone his boss. He'd rather walk away from the opportunity to earn a fair share than work under me in any capacity. It was like watching a door slam shut on the possibility of real partnership. Despite the swirl of anger and hurt in my chest, I felt an odd sense of clarity. Our relationship might never mend in the way I once hoped. He wanted my success, but he refused to respect the journey that birthed it. Indeed, that evening, as the event wound down, I slipped away to a quiet spot near the vineyard's edge. Leaning against a wooden post, I replayed the entire confrontation in my mind. My father's disbelief, his thinly veiled requests for money, his refusal to consider my job offer. For so many years, I'd done everything in my power to show him I was worthy. I'd longed for a nod of approval, a statement of support, or even a proud smile that reached his eyes. Yet the moment he realized my portfolio had soared to $20 million, his respect turned into entitlement. I recalled the ache I'd felt as a teenager, wishing my father would cheer for my smallest achievements. Now, here I was with a thriving empire, and still the same emptiness lingered. Oddly enough, that emptiness felt less potent tonight. The shift was undeniable. I no longer craved his validation because I'd seen what it was worth, conditional, fleeting, and dependent on financial gain. Something settled inside me, like a quiet acceptance. He might never see me as someone deserving of unconditional love, and that was his loss, not mine. Indeed, in the days that followed, I sensed a new kind of power coursing through me, a freedom from the old chains that once bound my self-worth to his approval. I no longer felt an urgent need to prove that I was more than just the black sheep who wore thrift store clothes. The moment my father walked away from my job offer, it became crystal clear. I held the cards now. No longer was I the underdog struggling to gain recognition. I had a track record, a portfolio, and a community of real estate professionals who respected my journey. Even at the restaurant where I still worked part-time, my coworkers now saw me as the savvy investor who owned a vineyard estate, not just the girl hustling for extra tips. For so long, the familial dynamic had cast me in the role of the dreamer whose head was in the clouds. Now, I had tangible proof of my capabilities. Strangely, the better I felt about my accomplishments, the less I needed him to acknowledge them. The power had shifted, and I wasn't about to squander my energy chasing validation from someone who refused to see me for who I really was. Despite this newfound confidence, I couldn't deny the pang of sadness that lingered. It would have been a beautiful thing if my father had chosen to accept my olive branch and join me in this endeavor. Father and daughter united in building a legacy. But that fairy tale ending wasn't in the cards. He retreated to his familiar stance of pride and indignation, unwilling to bend even slightly. I tried to keep the door cracked open, sending him a polite message a few days later saying I was still willing to collaborate if he changed his mind. The silence that followed confirmed what I already knew. He was too wounded in his pride to come around. It wasn't the triumphant reconciliation I'd secretly hoped for. Instead, it was a bittersweet acceptance that success doesn't always heal old wounds. Sometimes it just reveals them in sharper detail. I found myself oddly at peace with this outcome. Not every story ends with a hug and a happy tear. Sometimes the best we can do is honor our own journey, even if it means our loved ones remain on the sidelines, unwilling to evolve alongside us. Indeed, word spread throughout the extended family about my father's reaction and our tense exchange at the vineyard. Some relatives suddenly became very interested in my life, sending texts or Facebook messages to congratulate me, or hinting they might like to invest with me. Others held on to their skepticism, calling it beginner's luck, or insinuating I must be up to something shady. My mother tried to play mediator, urging me to make amends for the sake of family unity. But I stood firm, explaining that the door had always been open if anyone genuinely wanted to learn or work together. I was done groveling for acceptance. I saw how money and success could twist people's perceptions. Either they admired it and wanted a piece, or they resented it and tried to undermine it. Regardless of their reactions, I'd learned an important lesson. My sense of worth couldn't hinge on their opinions. Whether they joined me on this path or not was their choice. I had my own future to nurture. And if they chose to believe the worst about me, that was a reflection of their fear, not my character. My focus remained on continued growth in both my business and my own self-esteem. I never set out to claim victory over my family or anyone else. But as I looked at where I stood, stronger, wealthier, more self-assured, I felt a distinct sense of justice. It wasn't revenge that drove me to succeed. My motivation had been freedom from the expectations and limitations that I felt suffocated under as a child. I didn't want to spend my life punching a time clock just to scrape by. I didn't want to rely on fleeting approval from people who never truly believed in me. Every property I bought, every deal I closed, was an act of self-respect. It was me choosing a different life than the one my father tried to box me into. Now that I'd achieved a level of success most people only dream of, I realized the best revenge wasn't revenge at all. It was living authentically without bitterness. The justice in it was undeniable. While my father's voice once echoed with ridicule, that same voice now carried regret and desperation. He wanted in, but he didn't want to do the work. And that was the real dividing line between us. Indeed. I stand on my own terms now, fully aware that success doesn't always mend the fractures that run deep in a family. Sometimes our greatest triumphs illuminate the very flaws we've been trying to patch for years. My father may never offer a genuine apology for the years of dismissal and mockery. I may never again crave his approval, at least not in the old desperate way. When I walk through my vineyard, watch the sun dip below the grapevines, and listen to the land that's become my sanctuary, I feel a sense of belonging I never felt at my parents' house. I define success as the freedom to shape my own destiny, to invest in myself, even when others doubt me. No fatherly grin or pat on the back can match the satisfaction of knowing I forged this path alone. Sometimes success doesn't bring reconciliation. Sometimes it just brings justice, the kind that reminds me I am enough, that my worth was never dependent on anyone else's blessing. And in that quiet truth, I find a peace far more valuable than any fleeting approval my father could ever give. Indeed,